Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. Today we'll hear Chapter 13, Robert's Cross. This is where we catch up with Bart Roberts and Sam Bellamy, who have been shanghaied on the Lurline. Don't forget about the weekly newsletter, The Pirate Republic, that comes out every Friday. You can sign up for that at thepiraterepublic.com. It's time to strap on the cutlass, load your pistols, and get ready for Pirates of the Wild West. Chapter 13, Roberts's Cross. Bart Roberts observed the quartermaster's movements closely as the big man pushed past the line of workers on their way to the engine room, where Bart stood at the tail end. Vern had given Bart a snide wink as they passed each other. He was wearing several of Bart's ornate rings on his fingers. Bart turned his head to follow the large Icelandic man as he dipped his head below each bulkhead while striding down the metal hallway. Roberts now knew exactly where all his jewelry had gone when he had been shanghaied aboard this vessel and lay in a drug-induced stupor. His life seemed to be on a downward slide this last week. Forced into hard labor in hot, dangerous conditions for 12-hour days was taking a toll on his body. The threat of violence had stopped him each time he sought to go topside of the ship. Sam had been bludgeoned with what he later learned was an instrument called a sap by Max, the lanky enforcer, when he demanded to talk with the captain about the poor working conditions. His eyes glared at the receding quartermaster, who was now also assuredly in possession of his prized diamond-encrusted cross as well. He vowed to himself that before this ship reached its destination port, he would cut out Vern's heart and retrieve all that the man had stolen from him. "How many men stand in our way of a successful mutiny?" asked Sam Bellamy in a low, conspiratorial voice. Roberts turned toward the young idealist pirate and smiled. It was as if Sam was reading his thoughts. Three men and 3 guns is all I've seen. Just Vern and his 2 mates." "There must be several more above decks guarding other parts of the crew," said Chester. Sam, Bart, and the rest of the engine crew were restricted to the engine deck, the crew galley, and their bunks. None had seen more of the ship, nor had they been allowed to see the sun or breathe fresh air since they had been shanghaied into working on the Lurline. The men made their way to the engine room, following in the wake of the stocky enforcer O'Farrell. The clanging noise of the engines grew louder as they approached the entryway, and the heat of the boilers could be felt rising as the men moved through the hallway, like they were approaching the gates of hell itself. "Get to work, you sad-looking scum!" bellowed O'Farrell as he stood in the doorway pointing at the fiery coal boilers. The crew that was currently working looked up at the new shift arriving, and their faces, blackened by coal dust and streaked with sweat, barely showed signs of relief that their workday had ended. The men were so beaten down by the harsh working conditions and long hours that they couldn't even take pleasure in the end of their day's work. They just set their tools down for the next man to use and slowly shuffled out the door. O'Farrell barely gave them a glance as they passed him on their way to either bed or chow. The enforcers were becoming lax as the trip drew on, thought Bart as he watched. "How long before we arrive at the islands?" Bart asked Chester, loud enough for him to hear over the engine noise, but not so that his voice would carry to O'Farrell. Chester thought and counted on his fingers for a moment before answering, 3 days, give or take." Bart looked around at the men toiling in the engine room. Not a long time to organize a mutiny, but the longer we wait, the more tired and beaten down we will become. You could see the weakness in the eyes of the men who had been conscripted into servitude aboard this ship for a longer time than Sam and Bart. They had lost their resolve and given in to the idea that this was just their life now. There was the promise of pay at the end of each voyage, but Bart had been told that each time the boat docked, Vern had withheld pay by deducting the men's food, uniforms, and whatever else he could come up with to avoid giving the men their wages. Bart stared at the revolver shoved into the front of O'Farrell's pants. If he could get possession of that gun that fired 6 shots without reloading, he would have a chance to take over the ship. Looking around at the tired men toiling around him, He wondered how many would fight for their freedom against the enforcers of the Lurline. Bart had been involved in a few mutinies throughout his career, and he knew that once the tide turned in a specific direction, the majority of the men would follow that tide. That gun stowed in the waistband of the cocky Irishman was the key to turning this tide. Once the 12-hour shift was over, the engine room men made their way to the galley for their dinner. The quality of the food had lost its luster for Bart and Sam, now becoming just fuel to shovel into their mouths to keep their own fires burning. They sat across from Chester at the table crowded with workers that they had come to know over the past several days. "Bart and I have been planning something," Sam said in a hushed voice to Chester. The older man with the long mustache looked up from his food at Sam, focusing on the day-old bruise blackening the right eye of his handsome face. He glanced around the room and then at the men eating at their table for a moment. "I know it. Going to get someone killed, likely." Chester looked hard at the two pirates. "It's a big ship. There'll be more enforcers on the upper decks plus the captain, and I'm sure he's got men and guns." He pointed his fork at the other men at the table, who were beginning to listen in on the conversation. "Some of these men will follow you for sure, but it probably ain't enough. You also got 100 or so regular folk up there. You going to be responsible for them too? What if they resist? You going to kill them? These men, and their captain, took our freedom. You said so yourself, they ain't going to let us off at the islands. They'll work us till our backs break, then feed us to the sharks. Look at Sam's face, look at your arm. It ain't healing properly, it's growing rot, and if it don't get treated, it's going to have to come off," Bart said. Chester looked at his bandaged arm that was hiding discolored skin underneath. "Tomorrow, at the start of our shift, we take O'Farrell," Sam said. "We stop the engines, and Vern or Max will come to check, and we take them too. Then we have 2, maybe 3 guns, and we go straight to the pilot deck and take the captain. Once we have him, the ship will be ours. No more fighting. Trust me, I know how the dynamics of ship and crew works. The civilians can join us or be secured until we reach the islands. No harm will come to them. They'll have their freedom when we dock." "Which one of you becomes captain, then?" asked Chester. All the men at the table were listening now, watching them. Bart smiled and leaned into the crowd. "We vote. Everyone gets a vote. All men equal shares, each able to rise above their station. It's the pirate way." Bart Roberts awoke to the rise and fall of the ship. The sea must have become bigger while he had been sleeping. He knew from his long years at sea that it meant there was a storm brewing out there. The swells must be quite large to move a ship this size in this way. Would he be able to see the storm's direction if he was topside? It was difficult to judge whether it was day or night this far below deck. He had slept for 4 or 5 hours, he judged, and it would soon be time to set out for another day working, shoveling coal into the ship's infernos. Today, though, would hopefully be the last of that. He wasn't sure if the rest of the engine room men would follow him and Sam into an act of mutiny, but hoped that once they made their move, they would join in the fight for their freedom. He stretched in the bunk, joints' audibility creaking in the process. "Do you think our pirate mates are faring any better than us this last week?" Sam quietly asked from the bunk below him. "Probably gambling, whoring, and drinking. Think we'll ever see them again?" Bart pondered that question before answering. "Don't know. I would like to see that Charlotte de Berry again." Roberts sighed and laid back with his hands under his head, staring at the metal ceiling. "Did seem like there was some bewitching between you two. I hope you get a chance to find her again." Sam let a silence pass between them. "I don't understand what has happened to us, but maybe there is a reason we were all thrown into this together. If we can get back to them, we can figure it out. Maybe find a way back to our home in 1718 or find a new purpose in this place. I'm not certain that piracy can survive in this place. It's too modern. Ships made entirely of metal, men everywhere carrying pistols that could kill you 6 times over. No need of a sword or a dirk. Can't get close enough to use them anyhow. Get yourself shot well before. I'd give an arm for my sword or a dirk today. Make quick work of a red-faced Irishman, I would. Don't you worry, Sam. We will take back our freedom and find our mates. If we're stuck here in this world, then we will adapt and persevere. We bested the most powerful nations the world had ever seen, owned the waters of the Caribbean, and created our own rules, never to be controlled by the Crown of England or Spain or the likes. We started with nothing then, and we can start with nothing again. but as God as my witness, we will thrive and carve our way to riches and glory and have our freedom after this bloody day. A clanging could be heard down the hallway, and then the door opened, with the colossal form of Vern filling the space. "Wake up, ladies. Storm's coming. You lot are actually going to need to work today. Need the engines running at peak." The men all slowly started to get out of bed and dress for the day. "Get to it, you lazy bastards," Vern shouted and struck one of the men in the back of his head for not moving fast enough. The man went tumbling to the ground, taking Sam with him. Bart turned aggressively toward Vern to be stopped by the look of murder on Vern's face, as well as the hand grasping the grip of the holstered pistol. "You looking to lodge a complaint?" Vern said smugly. Sam helped the fallen man up, and they finished dressing. Bart stood down from the threat of violence. Vern smiled and waited as they all pulled on their boots and filed out of their racks. They stumbled down the passageways and stairs to the engine room as the ship rose and fell with the increasing swells, Sam and Bart having less trouble than most because of their long experience with rough seas. Most of the men working on the ship had spent little time aboard sailing vessels before being shanghaied onto the Lurline. Some had been farmers, some miners, others just drunks and gamblers that just had the poor luck of being in the wrong saloon or opium den before finding themselves stolen aboard this very ship. O'Farrell and Max were waiting in the engine room with the earlier shift when they arrived. "They're all yours, O'Farrell. Make sure the engines run smooth until we get through this weather," Vern said. "Aye, aye, sir. I'll make sure they don't slough off any." Vern and Max led the other shift of men out the door to their meals and bed. Sam, Bart, and the others began the tasks of feeding the 6 burners and monitoring the engines. They were now all familiar with the workings of the 2 engines, turning the 16-foot-tall 4-finned propeller that moved the giant ship across the ocean. Sam and Bart waited out the time, calculating in their heads when Vern, Max, and the other workers would be sitting in the galley eating their meal before making their move. Bart kept glancing back at O'Farrell as he slouched against a bulkhead, steadying himself against the rise and fall of the ship cresting the growing swells. O'Farrell caught one of the glances and glared back at Bart while straightening himself up. Bart and Sam then looked at each other with an unspoken decision that it was time to act. Sam pushed a cartful of coal toward another boiler, shoving another man to the side. The man who was in on the game shoved Sam back, yelling at him to watch where he was going. Sam grabbed the man and roughly shoved him to the floor. "I'm tired of you getting in my way, bilge rat," Sam yelled at the man who had started getting to his feet. They began shoving each other again and knocked over the cartful of coal. "Hey, enough, you scum! Get back to work," hollered O'Farrell. Sam and the man continued to shove and pull their blows as they tussled with each other. O'Farrell had had enough and strode over to the pair, billy club in his hand. The man Sam was fighting with saw an opening and shoved Sam into O'Farrell, knocking them both back and sending them down to the floor. Bart rushed over with his shovel, wielding it above his head to smash it into O'Farrell's head. Just as he reached him, the ship rolled to port, hard, causing everyone to stumble and fall. Bart crashed into a bulkhead with his shoulder, knocking the shovel out of his hands. Sam rolled on top of O'Farrell and delivered a blow to the man's face. The barrel-chested man elbowed Sam in the jaw, then threw the lighter man off him into the toppled coal cart. The man Sam had been fighting with struck out at O'Farrell, but the blow was dodged. O'Farrell was a man who grew up brawling in the Irish port town of Wexford and was no stranger to violence. With a backhanded swing of his billy club, he sent the man sprawling to the metal floor. Chester threw a hammer at O'Farrell's head, but his aim was too low. It landed with a thunk against his chest, surely to bruise, but nothing more. A few of the other men rushed toward O'Farrell, but were sent dodging back as O'Farrell swung the club, striking one and missing another. Bart recovered his shovel and brandished it toward the enforcer. Sam was on his feet with a large wrench in his hand, ready to strike. "Enough playtime!" O'Farrell bellowed, and pulled his revolver from his waistband and pointed it from one man to the next. "How about I just shoot you all and bring back the first shift?" The men continued to stand their ground, but the fight was going out of them in the face of the big iron gun pointed at them. O'Farrell stalked forward, and the men retreated behind Bart and Sam. Just then, the burner that O'Farrell happened to be standing in front of belched out a blast of heat and smoke from being unattended, causing the man to flinch and cover his face with his arm from the heat. Bart Roberts jumped into action and swung the shovel, catching the hand that was wielding the gun. Crack! O'Farrell felt several bones in his hand break from the blow, and the revolver flew across the room. He stumbled back, holding the injured hand, hate filling his eyes that matched the hate coming from Roberts. "I'm going to kill you for that, scum," O'Farrell spit out. Roberts narrowed his eyes at the man and swung the shovel as hard as he could at O'Farrell's head. Vern did his best to eat the stew that was slopping out of his bowl with each hard pitch and roll of the ship. He hated these Pacific storms that were so common this time of year. Not so much for the violent motions of the ship, but more for the belly aching and complaints he would hear from the passengers and crew. He grew so tired of the lack of hardiness people displayed these days. Grown men grumbling about too much work, not enough sleep, and the food not satisfying enough for their taste. He scoffed to himself, thinking none of them would be able to endure a single winter in his beloved home in Iceland. Vern stabbed a chunk of potato with his fork and popped it into his mouth, glancing at the rings that now adorned his thick fingers. He had taken them off that dandy named Roberts. Roberts and the one called Sam came on board with quite a bit of gold and silver jewelry that was now stored in a pouch under his mattress. One of the items was an enormous diamond cross necklace that would fetch a small fortune on the islands. Probably a large fortune if he held off selling the loot until he returned to San Francisco. Vern smiled to himself at the thought of cashing in his take from this voyage. If he played his cards right and sold the jewels for the right price, he could travel back home, rich as a duke, and purchase a large piece of land, so big he would be able to hunt all the game he wanted on his own property. He could raise cattle, horses, and never set foot on another boat again. Those two men were going to have to find an accident when the Lurline arrived at the islands. It didn't go unnoticed by him the way the two looked at him. Ready for murder, those two. He didn't want to keep looking over his shoulder, waiting for one of them to pounce. For now, they seemed cowed, but he knew their type. It wouldn't be long before they would strike. His need for them only lasted as long as this ship took to arrive at port. He could find 2 more willing or unwilling sods to fill their shoes once they reached Hawaii. Maybe tomorrow night he and O'Farrell would take them above deck and shoot them, then feed their bodies to the sharks. Vern spilt a bit of stew on his shirt as the ship lurched beneath a swell. The feeling of the lurch felt odd. Something was wrong, he knew immediately. He rose and abandoned his meal, snapping his finger at Max to join him. The pitching of the ship had suddenly reached an extreme. He and Max exited the galley and started toward the engine room. A young sailor named Bo was hurrying toward them from the upper decks. "What's going on?" Vern shouted. "Engines stopped," the man yelled back. "We need power or the swells will roll us." The man kept running past them. Vern and Max looked at each other in worry, then took off at a run after the sailor and toward the engine room, both ducking under the low bulkheads as they went. The 3 men shouted to each other as they ran. "What's happening down there? Captain wants to know." "Damned if I know. I left O'Farrell there to run the boilers," Vern hollered. "We need that propeller turning again or we'll all be finished," the sailor said, just before being slammed against the metal wall by the motion of a wave hitting the ship. Vern picked the man up by the back of his shirt and onto his feet again. "I'm going to strangle every damn one of them if this is sabotage," Vern yelled to himself. The sounds of the engines should have been loud at the moment, but the ship was silent except for the creaking and groaning of metal being tested for strength by an unforgiving sea. The 3 men slid down a ladder leading to the entrance to the engine room. Bo was the first to rush through the doorway, only to be blasted back from a blow to the head, knocking Vern down with his unconscious body. Vern saw that damn rogue Roberts standing in the doorway brandishing a now-bent shovel. Vern struggled to push the sailor off him and draw his gun. Max beat him to it, firing from his own pistol, but his shot went wide as Roberts dived out of the doorway. The other one, Sam, emerged firing 2 shots into the hallway from what he could only assume was O'Farrell's weapon. The first shot clanged and ricocheted down the hall. The second found its mark in the thigh of Max's right leg. The man shrieked and spun down to the floor, firing another wild round toward the engine room. Vern, now on his feet, took partial cover behind a steel girder in the narrow hallway. He took a shot at a shadow moving in the engine room as Max pulled himself up against the other side of the wall next to the ladder leading back up. "A mutiny is it, Roberts? Best be getting those engines started again, or we will all be headed toward a watery grave," Vern called out. "You toss those guns to us and we'll get them back started," Roberts hollered back. "There's 30 armed men between you and the captain. Couple of pistols ain't going to do it. They'll cut you down like sheep," Vern said. Bart and Sam looked at Chester to see if he thought Vern was telling the truth about the number of men. Chester just shrugged. Sam looked around at the 10 men standing ready with shovels, wrenches, and other blunt weapons. He then looked hard at Bart and quietly said, "We're committed now. We don't win this. They hang us for sure." Bart nodded agreement and saw resolve on the soot-blackened faces of the men standing ready. The clanging of running footsteps could be heard above Max and Vern. They looked up as 2 more sailors armed with rifles stormed down the ladder. Bart took a glance down the hallway to see them arrive to back up the enforcers. The workmen were definitely outgunned now. "It's over now, Roberts," Vern yelled into the engine room. "The rest of you men in there give up, and we'll just hang Roberts. You'll all be free to go. Give up the gun and end this now." Sam held the pistol with both hands behind the doorway. Bart looked over at the closest boiler, then smiled. "I've got an idea," he said as he started toward the burning coal. "I'll give you the count of 5, then we're coming in killin'," Vern said. He motioned toward the open engine room doorway. He and the 2 soldiers crept toward the room, guns raised and pointed, ready to fire at any movement. Max followed them, leaning against the wall with one hand, the other pointing his pistol. "1," Vern called out and stepped forward. "2," the enforcers peered over their gun sights. "3," Vern said as they moved within 10 feet of the doorway. "4," Vern nodded at the 2 sailors, and they all cocked their weapons. Vern paused just a few feet from the doorway, unable to see what was happening beyond. It was quiet like the forest would become while he was hunting game in the heavily wooded Icelandic forests. His memory recalled that the moments right before the violence of killing exploded into the air would always be devoid of sound. He was in his element now, hunting again, the deliverer of violence. 5. When Vern reached the doorway, it was as if hell itself had been unleashed. Burning coal bombarded the sailors and enforcers, sending them screaming and stumbling back as coal and embers from the boilers burned through their clothing and seared their skin. Vern dropped the pistol as his hands went to his face in an attempt to tamp the licking flames that burst into his beard and hair. The other men spun and dropped to the ground, screaming and rolling to escape. Bart, Chester, and 3 of the men continued to shovel burning coal at Vern and his henchmen. Vern got to his feet and stumbled toward the ladder leading upstairs. He used it to right himself as Bart stalked him down the hallway. Vern turned his burnt and ruined face as Bart approached. He reached into his boot and pulled out a knife and pointed it at Roberts. Roberts swung the shovel at Vern's head, but the big man was quicker than the pirate anticipated, and it clanged against the metal ladder. Vern ducked underneath the next swing as well and took a swipe at Roberts with the long knife. It missed his skin, but sliced clean through Bart's shirt. The 2 men took swipes at each other with their weapons in the narrow hallway. Robert's shovel banged into the bulkhead, breaking, sending its metal blades spinning down the hall. He held up the broken wooden handle just in time to deflect a knife blow from the seared and smoking man that was now barely identifiable as Vern. He now looked like a demon drug up from the depths of hell. His shirt and pants were full of holes that still burned hot from the coals. His skin, welted and pockmarked, emitted heat and smoke. One eye was burnt completely out, unseeing, yet the man defied logic, refusing to lie down and die. Vern advanced on Bart, looking for an opening, stabbing at him, just out of reach. Bart held fast to the wooden handle, its sharp splintered end the only thing between him and the knife in the hand of this beast. The men behind him had dispatched Max and the sailors with their shovels and wrenches while Bart and Vern battled. They had picked up the fallen men's guns, but couldn't shoot Vern without possibly hitting Bart, so they only watched and retreated away from the duel. Vern frantically stabbed out with his longer arms and sent Bart reeling back. The bigger man roared like an animal and rushed at him just as the ship crested a swell, sending all of them motionless into the air for what seemed like minutes. Vern was towering over Bart, knife pointed down at Bart's chest. There was nothing for Bart to do but fall back underneath the man and point his broken shovel handle up at him. The ship and all its occupants landed hard a second later with a loud bang and groaning of metal. Sam rolled over from his side and pointed his pistol toward the mound of scorched flesh that lay atop of Bart Roberts. Sam slowly got to his feet and approached the bloody scene. No one made a sound as Sam held his pistol pointed at Vern's back. He grabbed his shoulder and pulled the man off his shipmate. Roberts was covered with blood, and Vern's knife fell clattering to the floor as he rolled onto his back. Sam looked down at the wooden handle of Roberts' broken shovel protruding from deep inside Vern's chest. Roberts moaned and painfully sat up, resting on one elbow. He looked over at the men staring on. "Let's get the engines started up and gather the weapons. We need to take control of this ship," he ordered. "You heard the man. Let's get to it," said Chester. The men went into action while Sam helped Bart to his feet. Bart bent down over Vern and took his rings back from the dead man's fingers. "I'm going to pay a visit to old Vern's cabin and retrieve my damn cross as well." He then sheathed Vern's knife in his belt and took the dead man's holster and revolver. Sam and Bart turned quickly in unison and pointed their weapons as they heard the heavy footfalls of several running men above them making their way to the ladder. Then they came sliding down. It turned out to be the engine men from the other shift that they were already acquainted with. The newcomers paused and smiled to see how the tide had turned. Roberts tossed the man in front an acquired long rifle that was caught with one hand. The sound of the engine starting erupted through the hallway. Roberts shouted to be heard over the noise, "Let's go and pay a visit to the former captain of this here ship." I hope you're enjoying this historical fiction book with pirates and time travel all wound together in it. You can find the ebook and physical books at my website, briancantrell.com. You can also find the second book in this series, Pirates of World War II. And if you're a fan of pirates, you can check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that I put out every Friday. All sorts of great pirate history, events, news, and happenings. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.